In the short time that I have with you, like Bob said, what I want to do is really share with you some tips, tools, and solutions to build rapport, relationships, and connect with both customers and coworkers. And the reason I bring this up, the bottom line of why we're doing this, is because 90% of all the companies I've worked with over the 20 years or so I've been doing this, 90% of the problems result from communication breakdown. So I'm going to try to get into that a little bit today. But to get us into the right frame of mind today, what I'd like to do, just by starting off, is to ask you a question. And the question is, how many of you would be happy, just by a show of hands, if everything went right? Quality of service, reliability, raising your hand already? No, not yet. No. How many would be happy if everything went right? Quality, reliability, responsiveness, how you get along with your customers and coworkers. How many would be happy if everything went right about 90% of the time? Just by a show of hands, how many would be happy with 90%? How many would be happy if everything went right 95? How about 97? You know, there's some companies that literally have a 99% success rate, 99.9% success rate. For example, Federal Express, 99.9% on-time delivery. Motorola has even a better success rate than that. So assume everybody here be happy if everything went right 99.9% of the time, pretty much? Well, if you're happy with 1/10 of 1%, what I want to do is share with you some statistics. And the first one up here is with 1/10 of 1% off, these are some of the things that would happen. First of all, 12 babies would be given to the wrong parents daily if you're only with 99.9. And it's interesting. When I first heard this statistic, I was in a session with, like you guys were here, and it was right before lunch, and you know how you're just sitting there saying, okay, when's this over? I just want to keep moving on. And then I started thinking about this a little bit, and let me ask you this. How many of you, because it got me thinking, how many of you have kids in here that don't look like you at all? Anybody? And then I started wondering about this, because I actually have a 19-year-old, and Bob's seen him before. He's actually tall and good-looking, and I'm actually the opposite, so I'm wondering where the heck he came from. The point I'm trying to make is, would you still be satisfied? Would your customers be satisfied? Would your coworkers be satisfied? Would your members be satisfied? Because really, good is not good enough. You know, expectations are getting higher, the bar is being raised, and let's just put it bluntly, your associates, your managers, your coworkers, your members are judging you by the experiences they have elsewhere. So, for example, they're comparing you to the Southwest Airlines and the Disney World. There's a term which I'm sure a lot of you have heard before called moments of truth. Everybody's heard of that before? And this is really important when you want to build rapport and relationships and connections, whether you're on the phone, whether you're online or in person, is the fact that every time you have a meeting, transaction, or interaction with anyone, an impression is formed. So as soon as you walk in that door, people are making up their minds about you. And by the way, did anybody see the Wall Street Journal a while ago, how long it takes for people to make up their mind about you? What do you think that is? Anybody? 10 seconds is way too long. 3, 1. It's actually milliseconds. People make up their mind about you by the way you look or the way you come across. You're not smiling, you're doing this. And then they judge you immediately like that, and then you've got to talk your way out of it. For example, how many of you ever seen that show, Britain's Got Talent? Anybody remember that woman, Susan Boyle, who was the singer? And did anybody see that? How many of you saw that, by the way? And she's in the audience, and she's about to do her show, and it's like an American Idol type setup, but she's just sitting there, and she's about to get up, and Simon Cowell and some of these guys are like, oh God, who does she think she is? It wasn't Simon Cowell, it was somebody else, but who do you think she is? And then she actually gets up, and she's great, but she didn't look like the singer, the type of thing. So what are they doing? People, again, as I said, are moving their judgments about you. There was a study done by the University of North Carolina a while ago, and they asked 1,601 people. They asked them this question, and by the way, there were car dealers in this and a lot of different groups, but they asked them, is there incivility in the workplace? Is there rudeness? Is there backstabbing? Is there poor cooperation? Is there not getting along? Is there poor teamwork? Is there friction? Is there poor customer relations? Of 1,601 people, and when they asked that question, guess what 89% on a nationwide study said? 89% said yes. But when they asked those same people, are you ever rude? Do you ever backstab? Do you ever have poor customer service? Guess what 99% of the same people said? No, I don't do it. So the question is, who's doing all this stuff that we want to really know about on that area? And the problem is we don't see ourselves, because I do want you to take a good look at yourself today. How many of you ever have gone into a good example, this happened a few months ago. How many of you ever gone into an elevator and you don't look at anybody in the elevator? Is anybody like that, or is I'm the only person in here who does that? You know, it's you sort of look at the ground, or you look at the ceiling, or you look over there. Well, I was in this elevator a while ago, and just picture this. I walk in, I'm going from floor 2 to 17, and here's the door. I'd walk in, my mind was on something else, and I'm just facing the door like this, and all of a sudden I start going, I started coughing really loud. I did not have my hand over my mouth. And all of a sudden, a woman, I didn't even know she was in there, screamed, and she says, "My mother taught me, when you cough, you put your hand over your mouth." So immediately, what's your first reaction? Is to do what? Is to like, you know, but I wrote this book called Get Along, so I can't do that. So I said, I'm ready to do it, but you know what? What did chapter 3 say? Do not hit people. So I couldn't do that. So I listened to my book, but what I did is we're traveling up, and I turn around, and I look her right in the eye, and I said, you know what? I was calm. I really appreciate what you told me. Because, however, I don't want to give people coughs like this, and I want to thank you for sharing that with me so I don't, you know, give people diseases and coughs and all that. And you know what she did? She calmed down herself, and she said to me, she said, you know what, you are so nice. But guess what she said next? She said, when I tell people what I just told you in the nice way that I told you, they start yelling and screaming at me. And then you know what she asked me? She says, what's their problem? Now I didn't have time to pull out my slides because I was going to show her what her problem was. But in her mind, she thought she was talking to me in a what? In a nice way. How many of you have ever seen that show, Think You Can Dance? Anybody ever seen Think You Can Dance? And there's a guy named Nigel in there who's one of the judges, and he's pretty ornery. And he said this. He said, it's not necessarily the best dancers who win, it's the ones they like the most. And think about that sometimes. How many times have you not dealt with somebody because you didn't like them? And maybe they had a better product or better price or better something in that area. By the way, this is where I get all my material from Think You Can Dance show. So all you guys go to the deep stuff. I get it on TV. But anyway. The other thing is Teddy Roosevelt said, too, the #1 most important single ingredient for success is knowing how to get along and connect with people. So it really goes into that area. And it's interesting, too. This was just on the news the other day. CNN interviewed some recruiters, professional recruiters, people that hire people for jobs. And it was interesting when they said, what do they look for when hiring people? And this sort of got me by my attention. And they all said this, it's not their background, it's not their experience, it's not their qualifications, but how they present themselves and connect with the audience. And you hear this over and over and over again in those areas. So the bottom line, you know, by the way, we're all being judged and observed all the time. Everyone in this room, your body language, your tone, how you come across, and no matter what you do. And the bottom line is, everything being equal, people are going to what? They're obviously going to deal with people they like and they trust. But here's the other line you want to look at. Everything being unequal, they still deal with people they like and trust. For example, how many of you ever walked out of a negotiation to buy a car because you didn't like the salesperson? Anybody ever done that? You know, might have the better price, better this, but you just didn't like their attitude. I mean, he said this, which is something to remember. He said, our productivity is the result of the trust we have with each other. If you have the right trust, working relationship environment, and positive communication, the work gets done and the customer keeps coming back. So all these things got to constantly be worked on. And to take it a next step further, there's a study done by Harvard and Stanford University a while ago that said that only 15% of your success in life will be due to your technical skills, and 85% will be your social, your communication, your ability to get along, your emotional intelligence. Now, by the way, do not read this the wrong way. A lot of people read this and say, you mean I just can be nice and be an idiot at work? No, you can't. You got to be competent at what you do, else you won't have a job. But if you want to get cooperation and build rapport and get people to get along, you've got to work on that other aspect of it. To emphasize this 15 to 85% a little more and working with the office, just one other thing that goes along with this a little bit is I always like this quote from Agilent Technologies. I don't know if anybody heard of them, but I did some work for them a while ago. And I always like this one, so you might want to think about this. He said, 50% to all our obstacles success centered around team dynamics. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And think about that for a moment. If people don't get along, they don't work together as well, or this, I don't care what plans you have, I don't care what strategies you have, guess what happens? Nothing's going to work because everybody sits down and we got our strategies and our plans. If I don't get along with you, you don't get along. You know what? It's going to happen. And how many times sometimes we avoid people or do this because of that aspect of it. So think about that. And if you follow some of these guidelines, because I'm going to give you a few more things today which you can do, if you follow these today, you'll get along like these guys did here, right here. So if they can get along, then you guys can too. These are my past clients, by the way, because I only work with the animal crowd. No adults will ever hire me. Humans don't hire me, just animals. But anyway, so just you will get along with these guys. Now, to put this into perspective a little more, let's start at the beginning. And the thing is, there's a term here, because what is your rule book? And let me explain what I mean by that. One of the ways, if you want to build rapport, relationships, connect with customers and coworkers, you have to understand yourself a little bit and where you're seeing things. And what we got to realize that everybody that you're dealing with, whether it's customer, coworkers, sees the world through different lenses. We all have separate realities of how life should be. And a lot of times people get on our nerves because they don't what? They don't see the things the way we see it in that case. And we've got, and we can't take it what? Personally in those areas to make it work. It's sort of like Republicans and Democrats. You know, you see this thing where people say, you know how you see an issue and some people say, I can't see how you can see it that way. I can't see how you can, and it's the same issue, but it's because of people's what? Realities and lenses and how they were raised and all that stuff. And I want to read something to you because this will cut your stress down quite a bit and help you in these areas. And it's from this great book, by the way, just a little plug, but it's called Check Out Your Rule Book. And I just want you to think about this, because if you actually go along with stuff, your stress level will go way down too, and you will actually get along better with other people. But it goes like this. We each have an invisible edition of our personal rule book deeply ingrained in our brains. These guidelines define our expectations and desires, how others should treat us, what we believe is right, fair, and just, and how the world and its people should behave. We judge people by our book. We have rules about being courteous, extending appreciation, acknowledging work, honoring time, demonstrating concern, being compassionate, delivering service, and the degree of effort required for projects. We have rules about how fast people should return phone calls and emails, reply to requests, respond with answers, handle problems, pitch in on projects, and most importantly, what people generally should do and what they shouldn't. The rules all serve as our indivisible code of conduct with expectations of reciprocal exchange or else. A lot of the ways people are, the people you have to deal with as customers or coworkers, is based, a lot of that is based on how they grew up when they were kids, when they were like 5 years old and 6 years old and 7 years old. So I look at everybody as little children. I look at everybody as little children so I don't get upset at anybody. And to help you get along with this, some of you may have heard this, but this was, how many of you ever seen this on the internet, Kids' Views on Marriage? Has anybody seen that, Kids' Views on Marriage? Let me just read this to you because these are the people you're dealing with now, and these were their thoughts when they were young, and this is how you got to deal with them. First question they asked, this was a kid, Alan, he's age 10, he says, how do you decide who to marry? And guess what he said? He said, you have to find somebody who likes the same stuff. Like if you like sports, she should like it that you like sports, and she should keep the chips and dip coming. So and by the way, if you want this guy's name so your daughter doesn't go out with him. Here was another one. How do you decide who to marry? And this is from Kristen, who's age 10. You know what she said? No person really decides before they grow up who they're going to marry. God decides it all the way before, and then you get to find out later who you're stuck with. You know? Anybody felt like that, by the way? Okay. What is the right age to get married? And this is from Freddie, who's age 6. No age is good to get married at. You've got to be a fool to get married. So, a large part of the way people perceive you is your what? Your body language and tone of voice. And if you don't believe me, let's say I came here today and I went like this and I said, I'm real happy to be here. You know, I'm saying the words right, but what are you picking up? No, he ain't. You know, and so sometimes you can say the message, but it goes off in the wrong direction. So to be more approachable, likable, and trustworthy, to come across, I want to give you a little acronym that you can use to soften your image, to make yourself more likable, approachable, and trustworthy. And by the way, I do have a handout for you on this one later if you want it, but if you want to take notes, I'm a note taker anyway. So, but the first thing, to make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy, the S would be what? Smile. Okay. And when I say smile, let me just say something about smile here really quickly. If you do not normally smile, don't start doing it all of a sudden. Okay? You come to work, why is Gil smiling all of a sudden? Am I going to lose my job or what? You know, he's got something on me. So, you know, if you don't normally do it, don't start doing it all of a sudden. Also, when we talk about smile, you know, it's interesting too when you're on the phone. A lot of you are on the phone a lot of times, and you know how the smile can what? Come through on the phone. And a long time ago, I was working with one client, and we had like 47% less complaints next year because we did one thing. These were telephone operators, and we did one thing with these operators. We put a little, does anybody ever do this? We put a mirror next to their desk, and when they got on the phone, they had to do this. They were required. We had ring, 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 and they had to look in the mirror. Good morning, how are you? And everybody thought, oh, they're so nice and so pleasant. Territory. And territory means getting into somebody's space. So for example, and your name is? Melissa. For example, I'm getting real close to Melissa right here. She's kicking me, by the way, so don't take this seriously. And in American culture, the ideal distance to be away from somebody is what? Somebody say 30 feet? Bob, did you tell me this advanced group here? I got to take this down a level. 2 feet? Somebody said 2. It's about 14 inches to 4 feet is the ideal distance to be for somebody. For example, how many of you know anybody like this? And if you're doing this, you got to take a look at yourself. How many of you know anybody like this is when you're talking to them, they're right in your face, and you step back and they don't get it. They just keep coming. And they keep coming. And they don't, and all you picked up is what? Bad breath. You just want to get out of there. A lot of this, too, is we need to get instant eye contact when we meet people. What's a trick that you can use to actually get, let's say you're meeting somebody intimidating or you're a little bit shy. How do you get instant eye contact with somebody if you're in those categories when you walk in the room? What's a trick you can use?
Handshake.
Pardon?
Handshake.
Handshake? Okay, if that works for you, it works. There's no wrong answers on this one. Handshake. How do you get that? Pardon? Ask him a question could be something that would work in that area. Say hello, that could work too. Okay, here's one thing you may want to try on this area too is let's say, you know, I'm a little shy and, I'm sorry, and your name is Tracy. And let's say I'm meeting Tracy and she's really intimidating or something. And so I come up and I say, what I would do is if let's say I'm a little shy or I just need to, because if you don't make that eye contact, what happens? People don't trust you, they don't build rapport, there's no connection there. It takes away from what you want to get across. So I would pretend, if she's really intimidating, that I'm not looking at a person, I'm looking at the color of her eyes. So what I'll do is I'll say, hi, I'm Arnold Sano, but I'll play a game with myself. What is the color of her eyes? And that generally takes about 3 to 5 seconds. I have no clue what yours are, so this might take an hour. Looking at there goes the staring. Misunderstandings cause people to become irate, lose respect, lose trust, lose cooperation, derail relationships. Has anybody here ever been misunderstood? Just a couple of you? Okay, we'll move on. So let me ask you a few questions, because we're talking about avoiding misunderstandings today. What was the first word on your list? Night. Night. And how many of you got that? Okay, almost everybody got that. So what's the point behind that? When you say something, what? Yeah, first words people remember. So a lot of times when you want to get your message across, so you don't want to be misunderstood, what do you want to do? You want to get what you want across right away. You know how many times we go off on the tangents, and that's when people are really listening. So we want to get the message across first of what we're trying to get. We want to get their attention and give them what we're talking about. Okay, let me ask you another question. How many of you had NyQuil on the list? NyQuil. Okay, about 90% of you had that. And that's usually in the middle of a conversation. How do we get that? Because that's like, you know, a lot of people, how many of you, again, listen on the phone, you hear what somebody says, and then you tune out. Anybody ever done that? You tune in, you tune out, you tune in, you tune out. And a lot of times people don't get the middle of the stuff. Why do we get that? I'm sorry?
Sleep, tranquil, wait.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of...
It was in there. It reminded you.
Product name. Yeah, product name, everything else.
Product, it's a brand. Yeah. Well, here's the point behind this, is about 60% of the American public is very visual. So you need to create pictures in their minds if you want them to understand something. For example, how many of you ever seen PowerPoint slides that have 1 million words on them and then you just tune out? Has anybody ever done that? You know, or people are talking very intellectually a lot of times and you need to have all the other examples and stories and anecdotes in there to have it. So create a picture in their mind. Let me ask you another one. How many of you had awake on the list? Okay, about 95% of you had that. And what's the point behind that one? Yeah, people remember the last thing you say. So as soon as you finish something, talking to somebody, say, I just want to reemphasize, here's the points I want to talk about. Here's what I've talked about. Here's how I want to summarize. Let them know, because that's when you got maximum listening. For example, how many of you ever gone to a seminar and somebody says, now, in conclusion, and as soon as they say that, everybody wakes up. So it's like, and then that's when you get them to listen again. So you got them for that last section. So you got to remember that. Okay, let me ask you this. Raise your hands up high if you had this one. How many have sleep on your list? Raise your hand up high if you had sleep. Keep your hands up high if you had sleep. Okay, about 20% had sleep. I did not say the word sleep. I did not say it. But yeah, but a lot of you got it. I did not say that. So what's the point behind that? We're asleep, maybe, but besides that, you hear what we think we hear. This is coming into Washington, D.C. Anybody live in Lake Ridge or Woodbridge? This was for 2 years in a row. This was coming up, the sign coming up into Washington, D.C. And we transposed a little bit. But this is what it said. I couldn't believe this. For 2 years it's up. It says, welcome to Washington, D.C., a work-free drug place. Now, what does that mean? You work free and get drugs? I don't know. I mean, that could be part of it. It could be. But what did they screw up there? A drug-free. Yeah, how many times, you got to watch it. Would you send an email out to somebody and they hate you forever and you wonder it's just because you, transposed one word. Another one on this one is like, this was for, I want to make this one, is for a car dealer. I read this actually in an ad in, where was this, in Houston for a car dealer. And it said this, it said, why go anywhere and get cheated when you can come here? This is a big problem I see in a lot of groups I work with is people say, oh, they're rude and this type of thing. And let me just say something about rudeness. Rudeness I don't think is intentional. People don't mean to be rude, but they inadvertently do things that have consequences for others. And it was interesting when we looked at the statistics, this was done by the University of North Carolina, of how it hurts the bottom line. It said 53% of people lost work time worrying about incidents, 22% decreased their effort at work, 10% cut back on hours, 50% considered quitting or changing jobs, and 12% actually did quit because of rudeness. How do we get everybody to like us, to trust us, to sing our praises, and work with us in those areas? And to do that, there's 6 things that you need to do on a regular basis, and I just want to leave you with these today. The first one there is attitude. And I don't mean to be fluffy about this, but everything really does begin and end with attitude when you really boil it down to it. I don't know if you knew this, but Hyatt Hotels a number of years ago when they were looking for people to hire, as far as attitude went, if you did not, listen to this, if you did not smile at least 5 times in a 5-minute interview, guess what happens to your odds of getting a job at a Hyatt? You would not get a job no matter what position because, and I had a group the other day, somebody says, well, that's unfair. They should tell you to smile. I said, okay. How many of you, just by a show of hands, how many of you see the good side of anything no matter what? 1, 2, no matter what goes wrong, there's always a good side to it. Pretty much on that? Okay, let me give you a test here a little bit because there's an exercise. I did this a long time ago. I did some work for National Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. Well, we're all in Washington, D.C., but National Dulles. And we had like 37% less complaints next year because we did an attitude exercise where we called it the flip side exercise. And everybody had to take a little black book. And when something went wrong, they say there's a flip side to it. Because this is easier said than done. I can't just sit here and say have a good attitude. It's not going to work. But what they did is they put down. So for example, if you hated your job, what's the flip side of hating your job? I got a job. I mean, that's pretty good these days, right? So you should have no complaints on anything. Let's say you put a dent in your new car. What's the flip side of that? Nobody was hurt. Okay, good attitude there. It's about time I get a dent in there. So here's another one. Let's say you lost a sale. Let's say you're in sales and you lost a sale. What's the flip side of that? Get the next one. And what's that old thing Tom Hopkins used to say? You got to go through 7 of these to get one. So, well, that means I just have to go for 4. You look at the bright side of everything. Here's one that might get you upset. Let's say your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, they just sort of took off on you. That could be pretty devastating. What's the flip side of that? Get a new one. They're gone, thank God. Chris says that is the flip side. What's the problem here? They're gone, thank goodness. More closet space. I don't know. Everybody's coming up with certain things. But it's funny. You can make fun of all this stuff too. But the thing is interesting is that, everybody remember Christopher Reeves, Superman? I was in a seminar with him once, and he was speaking at lunchtime, and he did this. He was sitting up there, and if you're aware of him, he was what was it called? He was paralyzed. And he couldn't move, but they moved him around like this. And he's talking about attitude, and he says, you know what? And he just moved his head. He says, I would change places with any one of you for any of your so-called problems. Does anyone want to take me up on it? And you know what? You couldn't hear a pin drop. And you know how some things just hit you right there that, what are my problems? And you need to take a look at that aspect of it. And one thing I would recommend on this flip side thing too, and you may want to think about this a little bit too, is if you're ever feeling like you're upset or things are going wrong your way, ask yourself this question. I don't know if any of you do this, but what am I grateful for at this moment? Does anybody ever do that? What am I grateful for at this moment? Because guess what? How can anything be wrong? Yeah, I can walk, I can talk. So what? I didn't get this job, or I didn't get this, or I didn't get that. I'm alive. And before ending, one thing I also want you to recommend that you do is I always have like this, putting thoughts into action. I don't know if a lot of you do this, but I always like to do this before. Every time I finish, I sit through anybody's session, is I learned that I relearned, I discovered, I noticed, I was surprised, I'm disappointed that I plan, and what do I plan to do? Because it's nice sitting through these things, but if you don't do what? You don't do anything, you're not going to do it. And what's the old saying? You got to do what? Work on one thing at a time. And how many days in a row do you do something to make it a habit? 21 days. Yeah, if you do something for 21 days. For example, I used to interrupt people quite a bit. And for 21 days, guess what I did? I just didn't interrupt people. And guess what happened after 21 days? Well, I still interrupt them, but not as bad. So it doesn't work all the time. But anyway, so some of this is good in theory and practice. But by working on one thing at a time and take a look at this, and as I said, I can get that. So to put this into perspective and to leave you today, because I know it's lunchtime, and what's the old saying? People don't mind if you start late, but they do kill you if you get into lunchtime. And Bob's giving me that look too. So I got it. So but to end on this, I find that the people who tend to be the best rapport builders, who tend to connect the best, tend to be nurturers. And I don't mean to be touchy-feely about that. But when I say nurturers, we all have a number of constituencies. We have our customers, we have our coworkers, we have our family, we have our friends. And by the way, family and friends are just as important too, because if things aren't going well there, guess what happens when you come into work? You start treating people badly and we don't get along as well there. So we've got to work on all these things. And there's an old saying, everyone is like a plant in the garden, and if you don't water and feed them, they're not going to grow. And I always like this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which I'll leave you with. It says this. He said, keep your thoughts positive because your thoughts become your words. Keep your words positive because your words become your actions. Keep your actions positive because your actions become your habits. Guard your habits and keep them positive because your habits become your values. Keep your values positive because your values become your destiny. And then he said that every day is a new beginning, and we must always remember that the nurtured seed always produces the abundant harvest. So I want to thank you again, and I hope you have an abundant harvest. And I'll turn it back to Bob. Thank you. Thanks.